cash flow issues, misclassified revenue, fraud, even embezzlement. Bad bookkeeping can lead to paying the wrong amount in taxes or even worse financial disasters like having to close your business down. Today, I'm going to walk you through the difference between a good bookkeeper and a bad one, and how in the dynamic landscape of 2025, you can hire the right one for your business. I'm James Masotti, the owner of Our Team Accounting, and on this channel, I am passionate about helping business owners achieve their personal and professional goals through intentional financial planning. Let's go ahead and dive right into today's video. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what red flags should you be looking out for. The first one is going to be lack of transparency. A lack of transparency really comes down to if your bookkeeper can't explain to you what their processes are that they are following, then there's a pretty good chance they don't have any that they are following. This can raise red flags because it means that there may not be consistency on the quality of the work that they have and that they're providing to you every single month. The next piece is going to be poor organization. So bookkeeping is one of those things that you need to be exceptionally organized. You need to make sure that you know when things are due, when deadlines are happening, and depending on what they're helping you with, you're going to need to make sure there's documentation in place and all of that sort of stuff. So if you don't get the sense that they're overly organized, then that's a red flag that you want to be on the lookout for. Another one is whether or not they have systems in place. So if all they're using is spreadsheets, that's not going to be best. It might have been great for you when you were small and just kind of starting out to keep track of everything, but they really need to make sure that they're using some sort of software. Some of the industry leading softwares out there, QuickBooks Online, Xero. There's a handful of others that are niche specialized for certain industries, things along those lines, but they really need to be making sure that they're using some sort of system in today's day and age. Another thing that's really critical to make sure that they have is a client management software. This is something that's going to help them keep track of all of the unique and special things about your business. So when you have certain deadlines and things like that, it's going to help them make sure that they can segment out what's important for your business compared to some of their other clients. And so if they're just getting by with like having things on like folders and envelopes and manual to-do lists, and that might work if they've only got a handful of clients, but as their business grows, it's not going to be something that can scale with them. So now that we've talked about the client management system, that takes us to our next point, which is communication. So we talked about communication in a previous video about tax preparers, and you're going to be talking to your bookkeeper even more frequently than you talk to your tax preparer. So understanding how they're going to communicate with you and whether that's going to be a good fit for your style is absolutely one of the most important things where we see success break down with a client bookkeeper relationship. One of the things that you're going to want to make sure that you check in on is how frequently you're going to be getting your books actually closed up and delivered to you. I would say the most common way is monthly, but there are some folks who will do quarterly, every 6 months, or once a year. And becoming even more common, especially for really engaged business owners who really want to track some of their top key performance indicators, is actually weekly reconciliations. So making sure that your books are done every single week. Not that you have to be able to get financial statements every week, but to make sure that all of your financial data is closed out on a weekly basis. We mentioned QuickBooks and Xero previously, and in our video about the tax preparers, we talked about there are some scenarios where the software being used is actually tax preparation software and not really small business accounting software. And that's important because you want to make sure that you have access to your business's financials. So if they're using a system where you can't log in and see what's going on, that might be something to really consider. Another piece that you really want to make sure that you have clarity on is how is the best way for them to communicate? Are you going to be doing emails? Is there some sort of instant messaging software, Zoom or Teams, Google Meet kind of calls, or are they still going to be using the phone and text messages? All of those are okay, but again, you want to make sure it lines up with how you as a business owner are going to want to be communicated with. You're also going to understand the frequency that you're going to get responses. This is the kind of stuff where, generally speaking, bookkeepers want to get really deep into their work. And so getting distractions and expecting like immediate responses isn't always the best to make sure that your bookkeeping is being done. And so you may be able to pay a little less if you're willing to like get responses within 24 or 48 hours. But if you're needing immediate responses, it's important that you communicate when those windows of time are. So now that we've kind of talked about the communication piece of things, what we want to also talk about is the scope of work. This is another area where people tend to get frustrated with their bookkeepers because they feel like they're not doing what they're supposed to. And there's a lot of subjectivity into what they're supposed to do, right? So what is bookkeeping? So that's why bookkeeping in and of itself is oftentimes just identified as, if you're familiar with QuickBooks Online, basically clearing out your bank feed or the transactions that are coming in, whether that's through some sort of a download or being manually created, of matching specific expenses to where they're going to go on your chart of accounts. One of the other services that can be offered are accounts receivable. So with accounts receivable, this is really where you are collecting money in from other folks, right? And so if you're having a bookkeeper do your invoicing for you, that's great. But then you kind of get into the well, should they be doing collections? And what's the definition of collections? If you're familiar with QuickBooks, for example, there's a button in there where you can send a reminder email to somebody. That really doesn't always fall into the definition of collections for a lot of people, but sending those reminders can sometimes prompt people to make their payments. But if you're expecting somebody to be on the phones and calling, harassing somebody to say, hey, you haven't paid your invoice and it's 30 or 60 or 90 days past due, a lot of times your bookkeeper is not going to be providing that kind of service. And if you're expecting them to, you want to have that conversation up front and see if it's within their ability to deliver that. On the other side of things, you've got accounts payable. And this is when you're going to be paying other people. This is the area where you really want to make sure you're paying attention. When we talk about fraud and we talk about embezzlement, this is the area where you have the greatest amount of risk for that. And so if you want to do these, this can be very time consuming for a lot of business owners paying their bills. And so you want to make sure that you are clear on what expenses are going out, what vendors are set up in your system, and just in general, making sure that this is a service that a lot of bookkeepers don't want to offer for that exact reason. They don't want to be in a position where they can be accused of embezzling somebody's money or anything along those lines. And so you really want to make sure if that's a service that you're interested in, that it's provided, and what are the checks and balances and controls that you make sure you're both going to be happy with the way that that's being done, and you're not constantly looking over their shoulder, questioning, are they trying to steal my money? Another one that can be brought up sometimes is actually payroll. So payroll is one of these really interesting things, even in large corporations. Sometimes payroll is handled by the accounting department, and other times it's handled by human resources. And so there's a lot of times where if you're looking to have your payroll done, not every accounting firm does payroll. And that's because they may not view it as an accounting service. And a lot of times as a business owner, you may want to do your own payroll. But here's the thing with payroll. We're not just talking about the quote unquote running payroll and making sure your employees are getting the check. Once that happens, there's a whole host of general ledger transactions that need to be coded to make sure that all the proper expenses are being booked to wages, different taxes that you have to pay, benefits that you offer your employees, to make sure all those things get coded into the right categories and segments. One of the other things that a lot of people are sometimes looking for would be budgeting services. And again, this is a service that not every bookkeeper is actually able to provide. They may not have the knowledge on how to do it. They may not be comfortable on how to do it, or how to work with a client on how to go through that. Sometimes that goes hand in hand with building a budget, is also building out cash flow projections. And those are oftentimes also considered to be more advanced kinds of services. So there are some bookkeeping companies that are happy to provide those services, but not all of them are. And so be clear on what the scope of service that you're looking for is, and whether or not the person that you're talking with is going to be able to provide that for you. Let's talk about the people itself. So there's a couple of different elements to the whole people part of the conversation. The first one of those is hiring a solo person. So there's a lot of folks out there who will do bookkeeping on the side as a way of generating some side income. It's a very popular side hustle. A lot of times folks that are doing that, maybe they have full-time accounting jobs and they're looking to make a little bit of side money. They could be folks who are looking for a very flexible work arrangement because of other situations that they have going on in their home life. And then there's a whole element of, are they domestic or are they overseas? So there's a huge talent shortage of accounting professionals in the United States, as more folks are retiring every single year than new graduates are coming out. And what that's doing is it's forcing more and more work overseas, to the extent that in India, they can actually produce certified public accountants in India now to do US-based work. So if you're really wanting somebody that's local, if you're wanting somebody that's going to come to your office versus being able to do things remotely, there's a lot of different elements of the whole people element that is going to be really important for you to know and understand. Then you've got the whole element of qualifications. So qualifications can really run the whole gamut of things. So there are people who do bookkeeping that have no traditional accounting background at all. But what they do have, they've learned through on-the-job training. And sometimes that's fantastic. It's one of the best ways to learn just about any skill. But you want to make sure that you have that understanding of, hey, does this person feel like they have the right skill set? Do they have referrals? Do they have recommendations? Like, how do I make sure I know that this person knows what they're doing? There are certification programs out there that you can become a certified bookkeeper or other terms along those lines. And those can be great things to have, but they're also not necessarily industry standard kind of certifications the way a CPA is, for example. And a CPA is maybe one of those examples of somebody that, might be doing your books, but just because they're a CPA doesn't actually mean they're going to be good at doing bookkeeping. And the reason for that is a lot of CPAs, it's kind of like a law degree or a doctor, a medical doctor, right? It's a general and broad term, and there's a lot of different specializations that a CPA could have. And so somebody who's really good at tax planning and tax strategy might actually make an absolute terrible bookkeeper. And so just because they've got that certification doesn't mean that they've got what it takes to actually be a bookkeeper. So now that we've talked qualifications, let's talk about the actual team structure itself. So if you hire somebody in-house, for example, you're probably going to be hiring an individual person. And so when you're thinking about outsourcing this work, you might also think, hey, it's totally okay to have an individual person. But you want to think through what are your needs, and that can work great for some people. But you may also want to make sure that you have a company and a team of people behind you so that there's backups and redundancies. If you don't want to be worried about like, oh, my bookkeeper's going on vacation, who's going to keep up with this stuff? Or my bookkeeper's retiring, or whatever might be happening, and then not knowing what's going to happen next with your work, right? So just being able to kind of know what is your comfort level in terms of, are you going to be hiring a single person, or are you going to ultimately hire a company that has a team of people to work with? Talking about everybody's favorite topic though is going to be, what should a bookkeeper cost? And the answer to this is, it depends. The reason it depends is on all the topics I already talked about. If you hire somebody overseas, you can probably hire somebody as cheap as $4 an hour in the Philippines, for example. And in previous businesses, I've done that. I've hired those folks and they can work out great. But you have to understand what you're getting and how much you're going to need to be paying attention to what they do. And do you want to manage somebody who's doing that work, right? And there's a difference between, are they domestically located or also overseas in maybe some higher dollar value countries, places like India or Pakistan or Ireland or parts of Central America, where there's a higher wage basis for those kinds of workers. Then you can get into hiring full-blown companies, right? And so where you're going to be paying, north of $100 an hour to hire a legitimate firm that has built-out teams and processes and technology and all of that sort of stuff to really help support your business through everything that it can do. And that is just on the hourly rate side of things. There's also a lot of folks who will price their services on a fixed rate basis. For example, that's what we do at our team accounting. And the reason for that is we want to encourage the relationship being built amongst ourselves. And so the scope of work is one of the biggest factors that really drives that particular cost. So even if you're paying hourly and you're just having somebody reconcile your books and clear your monthly bank feeds, that process is going to take a lot less time than if they're also doing your AR and your AP and your payroll, right? And there's also a difference of if you're a small company or if you're a really large company, right? The example I like to use is there's a lot more work from an accounting perspective doing $1 million $1 transactions versus doing $1 million transaction. So being able to just say, oh, it's tied to this dollar in revenue isn't really a great way of being able to give a quote on what should bookkeeping services cost. You really want to think about it from the perspective of the amount of work that's being generated. So when I talk about the amount of work being generated, here's one of those secret things that a lot of people won't actually realize. The more you as a business owner put your hand in the cookie jar, there's a pretty good chance you're paying extra to have your bookkeeping done. And the reason for that is, to be honest, most business owners think they're trying to be helpful or that they're trying to save costs by doing some of the work themselves, when in reality, they just make it worse. And so have those open conversations with your bookkeeper to say, am I being helpful? Am I being useful? Is there things that I could be doing where it would actually cost me less money if I stopped doing those things because you wouldn't have to fix mistakes that I'm making? Be honest and be open and be transparent about the fact that you're probably not the best bookkeeper in the world, because if you were, you would own an accounting firm and not the business that you have. And since we've talked about the scope of work and how that can play a big critical role, and we talked about how not every bookkeeper is really going to be able to deliver some of the services like budgeting or cash flow analysis, a lot of that stuff really starts to jump up into higher level, which can be considered as like fractional controller or fractional CFO type work, which, as I mentioned, isn't something that every company is going to offer. So go ahead and click this next video that's on your screen, because in the next video, we're going to be talking about what you should be looking for when hiring a fractional CFO. I'll see you there.